The conflict between the United States and Iran entered a new and dangerous phase after what military officials described as the heaviest day of bombing since hostilities escalated. Over a period of several hours, U.S. and allied aircraft reportedly carried out multiple coordinated airstrikes targeting strategic facilities believed to be connected to Iran's military infrastructure. According to defense officials, the strikes focused on missile launch sites, logistics hubs, and underground weapons storage facilities that intelligence agencies had been tracking for months. Satellite imagery and regional reports indicated that explosions were visible across several locations connected to Iran's defense network. While the Pentagon has not released full operational details, sources familiar with the situation say the strikes were intended to significantly degrade Iran's ability to launch long-range attacks against U.S. bases and allied forces in the region. This intense wave of bombardment represents a major escalation in the conflict. Analysts say the scale and coordination of the attacks suggest that Washington is attempting to establish overwhelming air superiority while limiting Iran's ability to retaliate effectively. However, the large-scale operation has also raised fears that the conflict could spiral into a broader regional war. With multiple countries monitoring the situation closely, the heaviest day of bombing so far may mark a turning point in a crisis that is already reshaping the geopolitical balance of the Middle East. During a press appearance at the White House, President Donald Trump made one of his strongest statements yet regarding the possibility of negotiations with Iran. Trump warned that there would be no diplomatic agreement with Tehran under the current circumstances, signaling that the administration believes military pressure must continue until Iran fundamentally changes its position. The president argued that previous diplomatic efforts had failed to stop Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional military activities. According to Trump, the United States cannot afford to enter negotiations while Iranian forces continue to support armed groups across the Middle East and threaten American interests in the region. Trump's remarks appear to reflect a strategy focused on maximum pressure. By ruling out immediate negotiations, the administration may be attempting to force Iran into a position where its leadership feels compelled to make concessions after suffering sustained military and economic pressure. Supporters of the president's approach say that strong military action and firm messaging are necessary to deter Iran from expanding its influence. Critics, however, warn that refusing negotiations could remove one of the few diplomatic tools capable of preventing a full-scale war. For now, Trump's statement has sent a clear message. Washington is not currently interested in compromise, and the path toward any potential agreement appears increasingly distant. Iranian officials responded quickly to the wave of airstrikes, condemning the attacks as an act of aggression and warning that retaliation could follow. State media in Iran reported that military commanders are preparing a range of responses designed to target U.S. interests in the region if the bombing campaign continues. Iran's military strategy has historically relied on a combination of conventional missile forces, drone technology, and alliances with armed groups across the Middle East. These networks provide Tehran with multiple ways to respond without necessarily engaging in direct, large-scale confrontation with American forces. Following the latest airstrikes, Iranian leaders stated that any attack on their territory would be met with what they described as a proportional response. While they did not provide specific details, analysts believe that Iran could attempt missile strikes on military installations, disrupt shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf, or encourage allied militias to launch attacks on U.S. bases. At the same time, Iranian officials are attempting to project confidence domestically. Public statements from government leaders emphasized resilience and national unity, while accusing the United States of attempting to destabilize the region. The coming days will likely determine whether Iran chooses a direct military response or a more indirect strategy. Either option carries serious risks of escalation, especially in a region already filled with complex political and military alliances. The conflict unfolding between the United States and Iran is not occurring in isolation. The Middle East remains one of the most strategically important regions in the world, both economically and politically. A large portion of the world's energy supply flows through the region, particularly through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical maritime choke points for global oil transportation. Because of this strategic importance, even limited military confrontations can have global consequences. Any disruption to shipping routes or oil production could trigger immediate reactions in international markets. Energy prices often rise quickly when instability threatens the flow of resources from the region. Beyond energy concerns, the Middle East is also central to several long-standing geopolitical rivalries. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Turkey all have strategic interests that intersect with the ongoing confrontation involving Iran. As a result, the escalation between Washington and Tehran has implications that extend far beyond the two countries themselves. Diplomatic decisions made in the coming weeks could influence alliances, security arrangements, and economic stability across multiple continents. The United States is not acting entirely alone in the current military operations against Iranian targets. Several allied countries have been closely coordinating with Washington as the situation evolves. While not all partners are directly involved in the bombing campaign, intelligence sharing and logistical support have played important roles in shaping the operation. Some regional allies view Iran's growing military capabilities as a direct threat to their national security. As a result, they have supported efforts aimed at weakening Iran's missile programs and limiting its ability to influence conflicts in neighboring countries. However, not all American allies share the same level of enthusiasm for military escalation. Some European governments have urged restraint and called for renewed diplomatic efforts to prevent the crisis from expanding further. The challenge for Washington will be maintaining unity among its partners while pursuing a strategy that increasingly relies on military pressure. If divisions among allies deepen, the broader coalition supporting U.S. actions could weaken, potentially altering the balance of power in the region. Financial markets around the world reacted almost immediately to reports of the heaviest bombing campaign in the conflict. Energy markets were particularly sensitive to the developments, with oil prices rising as traders evaluated the risk of disruptions in Middle Eastern supply routes. Investors often view geopolitical instability as a source of uncertainty that can impact everything from commodity prices to stock markets. In moments of escalating military tension, markets frequently shift towards safer assets such as gold or government bonds. The potential involvement of additional countries in the conflict has also created concern among economic analysts. If the situation were to expand into a broader regional war, global supply chains and energy markets could experience significant disruptions. For now, financial markets are closely monitoring statements from both Washington and Tehran. Any signal of further escalation or potential diplomatic engagement could quickly influence investor sentiment and global economic trends. One of the biggest concerns among international observers is the possibility that the current confrontation could expand into a broader regional conflict. The Middle East already contains numerous flashpoints where tensions could escalate quickly if multiple countries become involved. Iran maintains relationships with several armed groups and political movements across the region. These connections could potentially draw additional actors into the conflict if military operations continue to intensify. At the same time, several regional powers view Iran's influence as a major threat and might support stronger action against Tehran. This complex web of alliances and rivalries means that even a limited confrontation carries the risk of triggering a chain reaction of military responses. Diplomats and analysts warn that once conflicts begin expanding across borders, they become far more difficult to control. Preventing such escalation will likely require careful communication and strategic restraint from all sides involved. Even though President Trump declared that there will be no deal with Iran under current circumstances, diplomacy often continues behind the scenes during major international crises. Historically, many conflicts have included unofficial or indirect negotiations, even while military operations were ongoing. Countries sometimes rely on third-party intermediaries to relay messages and explore possible paths toward de-escalation. Nations with diplomatic relationships with both Washington and Tehran could potentially play such roles. While public statements may emphasize strength and determination, private diplomatic channels often remain open as governments attempt to avoid unintended escalation. These back-channel discussions can be crucial in preventing misunderstandings that might otherwise lead to larger confrontations. Whether diplomacy will eventually play a role in resolving the current crisis remains uncertain. However, history suggests that even the most intense geopolitical conflicts often include moments where dialogue becomes necessary. The escalating conflict with Iran is also likely to influence domestic political debates inside the United States. Military operations abroad often spark discussions in Congress about the legal authority for military action, the long-term strategy behind the conflict, and the potential costs involved. Some lawmakers have expressed support for strong measures against Iran, arguing that the country's military capabilities and regional alliances pose a serious threat to American interests. Others have called for greater oversight and transparency regarding the administration's plans. They argue that Congress should play a more active role in decisions involving prolonged military engagement. Public opinion may also shape the political conversation. As news coverage continues and more details about the conflict emerge, voters will likely form opinions about whether the administration's strategy is effective or too risky. As the conflict between the United States and Iran enters this new phase of escalation, the question dominating international discussions is what comes next. Several possible scenarios are now being considered by analysts and policymakers. One possibility is continued military escalation, with both sides increasing the scale of their operations. This scenario could involve additional airstrikes, missile attacks, and cyber operations targeting critical infrastructure. Another possibility is a gradual shift toward indirect confrontation, where each side avoids direct large-scale battles but continues to apply pressure through regional allies and proxy forces. A third scenario involves diplomatic intervention. If international pressure grows strong enough, global powers may attempt to broker negotiations aimed at reducing tensions and preventing further escalation. At this moment, the direction of the conflict remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that the events surrounding the heaviest day of bombing so far have significantly increased the stakes in one of the most sensitive geopolitical rivalries in the world.